Hello, everybody. This is Dean Val with Dean Kevin, who's going to share his experiences with us today on the Kevin, the Great Witness Adventure Series Is show. And we have with us also Charles, Jeremy, Ginger, and Ronald. And you're all welcome to comment or ask questions of Kevin when he after he shares his experiences. And these are from the real side, what we call the real side. And he brings back information and experiences that mean a lot to us as we objectively view our experiences and life that we are living here. And it helps us to see better from a greater viewpoint. And if you don't have your own experiences, we can live vicariously through Kevin's, because basically they become our experiences in a way. We can learn from them and experience through them, just like we had the experience. So this is very valuable what Kevin's doing for everybody. So I appreciate what you're doing, Kevin. Much gratitude. Thank you for being here, and go ahead. Thank you.
In this real side experience, I was with a group, and we were scouting out and finding various key locations. There were a number of individual places we had to find, explore, and almost tick off on a list. I'm uncertain as to the exact number of locations we needed to find, for I had entered this experience just as my group and I were approaching an old temple, which was almost obscured beneath the encroaching foliage of the dense jungle it was in. My real awareness provided me additional information, filling in a few details as it were, that this was the first key location of approximately 50 to 100 or so, somewhere in that range. There was a slight depression in the ground, where an opened doorway lay, a little like a drawbridge you might find on a medieval castle, that served as the entrance to this temple. We ventured inside, and the idea seemed to be that each place we found would have a clue or an indication of how to find the next location. So it would be a successive series of sites we were to be visiting, but only assuming we found and deciphered the clues contained within each that would direct us to our next destination. We knew we were seeking a statue, and as we entered, this statue was very apparent and in plain sight, right in the centre of the temple. It was a stone representative of Jupiter, depicted in a human, godlike form, and he would be clutching a sort of staff or other. As we examined the statue, it became apparent that it was pointing toward a particular area of the skies with its staff, and on further scrutiny, we realized it was a star system that it was indicating. For this scene and experience was at night, and the skies above were star-littered, and so it appeared our destiny lay with the star system revealed, and that is where we would go next, to location number 2. Before heading there, however, it was as though we were to report on our successful finding of the first location. The scene switched, and we were now in a new setting, in a sort of meeting room, It had the look and feel of a classroom even. I had the impression that we had in fact gone to the approximate area of the second location, or close enough to it, and this room had been established for us to make our field report, as it were. My group and I had constructed a very intricate and accurate model depiction of the temple we had just visited, and this served as a good visual for our presentation, the recounting of our adventure, the stone statue, and how we had determined the location of the second site based on the clue we had deciphered. Dwayne entered the room, and it was to him that we delivered the account of our activities. This room seemed to be a kind of temporary construction for the purpose of the presenting of our adventure, a debriefing by Dwayne, and a discussion about where in this area of creation we were in, and the direction we needed to head off to next, as this room or building was very much out of place in the overall setting of wherever we happened to be, as though it didn't belong here, and was manifested temporarily for the purposes of this meeting. The surrounding environment was another dense jungle scene, but overwhelmingly swamp-like, far darker, more sinister, murky, and forbidding in its general appearance. Also, there was a curious structure nearby. It consisted of huge stone platforms that ascended into the sky. The platforms are tiered like a wedding cake, and each level of this structure, each platform, served as a kind of water aquarium, and contained all manner of very strange and exotic-looking water-based creatures. The water itself, on every level or platform, was as murky as that which made up the swamps here, a rather uninspiring dark green colour. The tiers of this structure were opened to the sky, so not completely enclosed, and at the very top level were these dolphin-like creatures, rather hard to describe, but they seemed very sentient and more aware than the other creatures that the other levels of this structure contained. In total, there actually were 4 levels or so, and as we were discussing our next assignment in the room with Dwayne, my awareness afforded me the view of one of these dolphin creatures flopping from the top level of this structure to the one below it. For this individual, and indeed the others of its kind, were aware of our presence, and seemed very inquisitive, and although they were in some way supposed to stay at their particular platform, this one chose to descend all the way down, dropping from platform to platform, swimming through the various creatures contained in each, in order to reach the bottom of this structure and investigate the room that had been made manifest as a temporary discussion place for our group and Dwayne. One of the platforms, the second one from the bottom, contained an assortment of very predatory type creatures. They looked a little like cats, but with a body vehicle designed for water. This dolphin individual had to precariously get by these cat-like creatures, as they would be inclined to attack anything that shouldn't have been on their particular level. There were quite the assortment of various creatures on each level, but no indication of animosity or predation among the animals at each platform, as though a symbiotic relationship or a general balance had been established. The dolphin creature successfully evaded the dangerous cat beings, and inquisitive an individual that it seemed to be, it entered the room we were in, and was listening in on our discussion. I had the impression this was a rather dismal part of creation, by the very foreboding setting, but nevertheless it was here that we had to be, to reach our next key location. It may well have been the lower astral, and perhaps the tiered structure with its 4 levels represented the various other creation levels and dimensions beyond here. The cat-like water-based creatures may have represented reptilians of a kind, very aggressive toward any individual wishing to explore and see more beyond their position they had established for themselves, so doing what reptilians generally do, keeping everyone controlled, restricted, and in agreement to simulated experience by the dark forces' design. So these more aware, sentient dolphin beings were perhaps curious as to what we were doing, one of them at any rate, and had elected to investigate at great risk to itself, as it would have to get by the ever-watching reptilians. That the dolphin beings were positioned at the top of this structure suggested they were positioned higher in creation than the other creatures here. They had a greater awareness and recognition of the unseen parts of their personal self, and able to then move their awareness more freely through their simulation, rather than resigned, as most are, to the physical, astral parts of it, due to the way people have limited themselves through the agreements, focus, and decisions they have made. However, the murky water was the same throughout this platformed structure, so perhaps we had various tiers of the astral and mental realms, from the lower, where we were, through to what would be considered the nicest spots in the astral and mental worlds, the designated heavens, etc., and to the agreeable creatures here. These platform levels may indeed seem very delightful, but to our real awareness, each platform was as murky and forbidding as the lower astral swamp lands we were in. The platforms may have represented the entirety of creation, all of it infected with agreed-upon demise and degradation, as it is in reality the entirety of the personal self, with all aspects of it that agree with restriction, and the affected, deteriorating, and darkening simulator then will be so throughout all levels of it, from physical to ethereal. But again, we see the simulator as we decide it to be, or have agreed for it to be, a kind of simulated, agreed to overlap that conceals what is indeed a very ominous, dark, and oppressive creational realm at this moment in its cause and effect state, a little like in the Matrix movie, where the individuals that are locked into the dark force controller machine's matrix see a simulation that is nothing like as the world actually is, and so, as they step from the matrix, along the lines of stepping into their real awareness, they can see creation as it actually is, based on the agreements to restriction that have effected the simulation into a darkened realm. They see through the simulated surface. They see the overall of all the ideas of restriction through the consciousness. That, yes, still is a simulation, but a simulation that isn't hidden beneath additional filters and layers of ideas of how we have decided and agreed the simulator to look, and not how it actually is, just like the designated heavens of man, looking just like the delightful places that we have been programmed to agree as to their appearance, and so, as we are positioned in these astral and mental levels, we see the overlap of splendour that conceals an overall simulation that is shrouded in darkness and gloom, and so perhaps these dolphin beings could have dwelled in the ethereal, or the higher parts of the astral or mental, whatever this tiered structure represented. Really, it didn't matter. They were still in a simulator, the entirety of which is spiralling into demise. With our presentation complete, and with the addition of this dolphin being watching on, we would prepare to embark on the next phase of our adventure, to locate site number 2. We would have to navigate through the forbidding swamps, and as we boarded a long wooden type boat, we noticed how the swampy waters were filled with alligators, again representing the presence of reptilians lurking in this lower astral realm. Most of the gators were around the 6 to 10 feet range, average-sized gators, suggesting run-of-the-mill, typical reptilians roaming about, nothing to be overly concerned with. But then we saw the dark shape of an enormous alligator beneath the water. It glided past and under us, dwarfing our boat, making it look very much like a matchstick, for this gator had to be 100 feet in length, or somewhere in that region, as much as the normal-sized gators suggested your average reptilian. This monster indicated the presence of a far more formidable reptilian roaming the lower astral, some reptilian of capability then, or maybe even one of the reptilian life-level gods perhaps. A little unnerved, but unwavering in our determination, we proceeded through the swamps. The scene switched, and we were at another location. I'm uncertain if it was the one we were seeking in the swamplands, or another one further down the line of our targeted locations. But here we were, my group and I, in another temple, this one enclosed, with no view of the skies. As we explored, we came across these enormous beings that dwelled here. They were rather hard to describe, other than they were very large, humanoid to an extent, but almost as though malformed, or very bloated, and all were female. They sort of crawled along in a curious way, almost slug-like, for they lacked legs, just a kind of base that served as their means of motion. They were easily 60 feet or so in height, as large as buildings. Curiously, they all had a singular objective. They were seeking gods, or godlike beings, according to their idea of what this meant to them, almost as though they wished to devote themselves to gods and reap the benefits of doing so. As we came across them, they would approach us and seemed to assume or think that we were demigods, for they spoke, and this is exactly what they said, as they proclaimed that we must be demigods. Perhaps we had materialized in the temple before their amazed eyes, or performed some ability that had impressed these beings and made them assume we were along the lines of the sort of individuals they were seeking. For they would suddenly grab at us, and if they caught a hold of you, for despite having no legs, they did still have arms, and they would cling on to you for dear life, wrap you in an inescapable embrace, and refuse to let you go. I was among those of the group that these beings managed to grab a hold of, and although I was held fast, seems they had no intention of exacting harm upon me or the group. They simply embraced us and refused to let go. This was surely a very apparent representation of emotional attachment, and was based on their belief as to our demigod-like statuses. So it was emotional attachment to this idea that they had created for themselves as their personal intent. However, we soon determined the means of extricating ourselves from their embraces without causing them harm, for they seemed overall very benign, if not confused, and very unaware individuals with a personal mind full of funny ideas and intents. We simply assured them we were not demigods in any shape or form, and we must have been convincing, but perhaps these beings had the ability to read us in a way, to determine if our words were deceptive or sincere, for they immediately released us, and seemed very disappointed, almost devastated, as though this was the sole decided purpose of their existence, to find gods and be with them. They would crawl away, and my impression was they would continue to search for the gods they sought, perhaps continue crawling around this temple forever, waiting for their gods to arrive and visit them here. It was rather a sad thing to see, but we knew that they were so self-convinced and set on this intent that they would hear and accept nothing that would provide an alternative option or opportunity to improve their positions in life, and so we let them be. The scene switched one more time, and we were in another setting, not dissimilar to the temporary room that had been created in the swamplands. I'm unsure where we were exactly, and I received no impressions of the environment beyond our location, nor did we move beyond this room as we had done before. Dwayne was present once again, as were the same group that had featured throughout our adventures, and myself. Dwayne was inviting the group to describe in their own words the experiences we had just been through, for he pointed out how we each would have our own unique individual interpretation of what had transpired, along with our insights, perspectives, viewpoints, how we related to everything, and recognition of what took place in accordance with the various degrees of awareness we each had, etc., as we each are this awareness view, and as we have experiences, and as we interpret them as to how they seemed to us, so we each become more aware from the multiple views and perspectives provided, with the ultimate objective of eventually recognizing the ears from a creation, a simulation that the entirety of, in all its various forms and experiences, is for this real purpose, to recognize first our real awareness, then recognize the ears through the real awareness that it is a part of, from all the comparisons that creation provides. For we had been out and about, cataloguing places, scenes and experiences for our own process of awareness, but also, as Dwayne would explain, for the movies that eventually would be made on the physical level for the world to see, for the hints and references the movies would provide, that would bring the masses around to wanting to see and be more and become more aware also. Dwayne went on to say how we required a few more experiences of a particular type, as though needed for our process, certain experiences that we were lacking in some way. Also, these experiences were needed for the movies we would be making, as though they were essential scenes that if a movie was absent of, it would lack detail, context, and result in confusion on the part of the viewer. Overall, then, a complete spectrum of experience that would afford us and the viewers of the movies the bigger picture, with plots, subplots, and generally then greater awareness consequently for all involved. Dwayne referred to the particular type of experience we were lacking with a word or two. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I'm sure it was in reference to a specific life level, evidently a life level where these experiences we required for our awareness and the movies would be found. Dwayne, the great writer, responded to this experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "What we're doing here is we're looking for agreement. This is why you're exploring on the real side, and with what we're doing here on the physical. So you were looking for agreement from these creatures, etc. So an idea is, in regards to those huge slug women, their idea was that you were a demigod. You don't have to answer yes or no to that. Like certain people on the physical on Facebook, where they say certain things about us. Well, I don't always acknowledge that. That's not the idea. But at the same time, I kind of support that. In other words, when you're in that situation, you don't have to deny or accept it. The idea would be kind of to agree with it and acknowledge it. If, for example, people proclaim their love for the new presentation or the new man, etc., I simply acknowledge that I'm here for everybody. And if you come across people who have an interpretation like that, of thinking you're a god, because they're looking, and most people are, to look up to somebody, because everyone's looking for something, and if you simply acknowledge then that we're here for everyone, it's not confirming or denying what their idea is. Let them have their ideas. Sometimes people will ask me if I believe in God, and I would say that I'm fine with everything. I don't confirm it or deny it. So you rehearse and prepare yourself. Because with what we're doing out there, with those creatures or whatever, everybody has a basic instinct, and that's survival. It doesn't matter what body type they have, good, bad, or indifferent. It's all about survival. What we're doing is we're trying to get agreement, even if it's talking to the walking dead or whatever. And what you're seeing is different parts of creation that we're in, and it's really bad here. So, going through all these experiences, it's how you interpret it too. It's how you accept and see it. You're seeing their attitude. You're seeing how they define things. But you see a basic overall of us as humans, them as the body types they were, the reptilians, etc. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. They are all awarenesses in different body types, just like as you drive down the road and see all the different cars. But the idea is that it's the same basic thing, 4 wheels and a steering wheel. The idea is we're looking for agreement. We're out there exploring to see who will agree with what we're doing. So I always prepare myself. I rehearse for these things, etc. What would I say in a certain situation to where I can at least see if I can get agreement from them? So in that experience, you could have said, we're here for everyone, and we're here for you too. And their impression may have been that you were gods. Let them have their impressions, but at the same time, now there's an opening for you to show them more, and especially introduce them to REBISAR and the real guides. When I meet psychics that I want to get viewpoints from, the first thing I do is I introduce them to the guides. So again, that's what we're doing. The funding and everything else is all lining up here, and as you're going through your experiences, there will be the movies, and as I've said, yes, we're getting ready for all that. We're combing the realms and the galaxy to bring all this together. That's what we were doing with Claudie and Sandy, combing through all the levels up to the archons in the 6th level, etc., getting agreement. On the 6th level, there were these giant bear creatures that agreed to do the NUUU, and there are archons in the earth. Many people think they are bad, but they're here to benefit creation. Everybody has a basic nature. You just equate it to something simple, then you proceed with this and with what we're doing. We're gathering the troops. We're gathering the agreement. We are getting it. You're going through these experiences, and a lot of these things have been lined up for you, just like when you found the new presentation on the real side that was already lined up for you to eventually come into it. This is what we're doing too, and at the same time, you're having your experiences. We all are, and we're all coming together to share and support this. This is very important, as it all becomes a greater and greater awareness for us through this personal self, to where you can bypass all the old routines, and you can look at your personal self, and when you're ready to step out of all those old routines and get into something that's so much more beneficial, get out of that comfort zone, then things become better and better, and right now we have the world to deal with, but at the same time, on the real side, we are getting agreement. The guides are doing the same thing. On the real side, when I was trying to talk to bankers, etc., REBISAR was right there. Any of that personal stuff that's in the way, it is in the way with anybody, so it's all about no attitudes. This is the adventure here, because again, the dark forces are looking to destroy the earth as fast as they can. There are a few knuckleheads left, but possibly, eventually, they will give up. We're very close here. There's a lot to do, and eventually we will have it done. When we get the funding, we're going to make those movies, because the people on Earth need it right here, not in their heads, not in their consciousness, not in the spiritual worlds, right here, all right here now. We are the center of creation, right here.
Well, one thing in the beginning, what we think is reality or life is not usually the case. It is what it is. So part of what we're waking up to is what it is. So what we think it is, it's usually not. So that's a big thing. I'll give you an example. We're really socially conditioned a lot here. And we have these cats at our ranch. And these cats have become beggars instead of being cats. You know, they're so conditioned. And I know it's on me because I feed them every day. So now all they do is come to the door, expect their meal, they get fed, and they go back, take a nap, and just basically stand by the door. Every time I come in, they run up to me, and you'd say, oh, isn't that cute? That's the way it should be. These are domesticated animals, and these are our pets. Yes, but Dwayne's giving a different viewpoint on this, that, you know, we are socially conditioned to all this. It's like a cliche to how we keep pets basically as prisoners, and that they could actually be out there hunting for themselves and not being dependent on us. But now they're dependent on us, and we're their slaves, they're our slaves. We have this emotional attachment, which is not bad, but it's just, where is it going to go with them? They're going to grow old eating this junk food that I feed them, you know, this crunchy food, little tuna fish. They're just going to grow old and die with this stuff. Whereas they could be out in the wilderness. They could be, you know, people call it feral, but actually they're animals. They could be out in nature, like the wildcats, doing their thing, catching mice, birds, bugs, lizards, having adventures instead of hanging around the house and doing what they do. And then people always say to me, well, you have so many cats, you got to get them fixed. You know, I know of a place down here, it's really cheap. And then that's another social, this thing, we're just so, you know, grooved and routined into this kind of mindset. This is just an example of how animals should be. But look at the horses and especially the dogs, they're on leashes, they're prisoners basically. And I'm not saying let them all go and be street dogs or, you know, get them run over in the middle of the street, but I'm just giving an example how we've been grooved into a certain way of thinking about animals in this case. And this is in relation to how we think about everything in life and how everything is prepared for us in a way to think a certain way. And what the new presentation does is help us to wake up to what it actually is, you know, and what we can agree upon it to be, which is a whole lot better than what it is now. The other thing is, Dwayne talks about rehearsing a lot, especially for these shows that we're doing, like Jeopardy and just anything like coming on the Skypes and the Zoom calls, rehearsing. What are you going to say? I mean, we're into randomity, but still have something. He says, have something prepared, you know, a line or two, so you can share. If nobody says anything, share something. So rehearse. Jim Carrey, you know, the actors like Jim Carrey, he rehearsed all his faces and voices and stuff, just hours and hours of rehearsing this stuff to prepare for his roles. So in a way, we're preparing for our role to present this stuff to the public. So have something that you can do to engage people with, have a backup, get prepared to be slammed like you, Charles. I mean, you're gonna get slammed all the time. People are gonna ignore you, fight with you, have attitudes, all this stuff, call you crazy. But be prepared with a line or two, make it humorous, you know, don't get offended, don't take it personally. People are trying the best they can or not. but it's our position, you know, be prepared, rehearse. And then
about your cats, don't you think Australia would just love to have them?
You mean food for somebody out there in Australia?
Well, they're loaded with
Rats?
mice and rats.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing they do.
They could probably use them.
They do chase down those little rodents. Really, even our kitten, he's only like 8 weeks old, and he caught a baby chick that a hen just laid. Week-old chick. He caught this and it was eating it, growling like, you know, get away, this is mine. This little kitten was already hunting, and that's what we're looking for. You know, they're hunters. Go out and hunt. And remember, Paul Twitchell had, if you're anybody, well, Charles probably remembers the Jadu, the black cat that always visited Paul. He didn't really like, hey, he just hung out, came and go. Jadu came and went, and they communicated with each other. They talked to each other, but he wasn't really like domesticated. He was just an amigo, a friend of Paul's and Gail's, you know. So he and that's what Dwayne talks about. Just one example of how we've been conditioned to think a certain way about something, you know, like in this case, animals, you know, and how they should be tied up, protected. You know, we have to rescue them, protect them. But this is all like stuff that, and it took me a while to get this, you know, it wasn't. And then yesterday I kind of got at what he's saying finally. Because we have such an emotional attachment to animals, you know, and it's okay, but just see it from another viewpoint, you know, just see it from what it could be, or their viewpoint, the animal's viewpoint. I mean, they get, just like us, they get attached to us and attached to their feeding time and all this. So they're actually, we're weakening them. We're like helping them to be, you know, dependent and stuff. But we're about being self-sustaining. We want people to be, and animals to be self-sustaining, you know, take care of themselves. It's more fun than be dependent on somebody.
Hi, I just wanted to comment about Val, you mentioned social consciousness, so I wanted to give an example of how people have been conditioned, and you know, I see it in my immediate environment, so to speak, here at my job, where you know, people, they look to their bosses. It's almost like they've been conditioned, almost like when you whistle for a dog, you know, and they run instantly. There's no sense of waiting at all. It's all urgent, very fast paced. It's like people don't have a minute to think. And that's just the way they live, and they go and they do it for the money. They tell me that they go and they spend their money on, you know, whatever they decide to. And they don't really stop to think about their lives. So I try to give them a different view of it. And, you know, some are willing and some are not. And you see a lot of, too, is their environment. A lot of them choose to be the products of their environment.
Yeah, it's really like that. And people like to be told what to do, and they like their routines, their comfort zone, and it's okay, but there's a point where you get saturated with this stuff, and it becomes not a benefit anymore for yourself and others.
It's easy to get lazy. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, the human nature is like that. It's just like, yeah.
That's exactly what's going on.
Yes.
We have a very comfortable life. We've got lazy.
And almost those who don't have a comfortable life have an advantage, because the struggle that they go through, the challenges, is like an opportunity to wake up in a way. So you can use anything. Dwayne talks about this, using anything that comes your way, hard times, good times, use it to relate, somehow to relate to this bigger view. Okay, Kevin, second experience. Thank you.
In this real side experience, I would find myself walking along streets familiar to me, as these were indeed the very streets that made up my neighbourhood. As I proceeded, I would see ahead of me were two individuals, a man and a woman. Both seemed to be equipped with technology of a kind, and were approaching something on the ground that from the position I was, I could not quite determine. As I came closer, what had the attention of the two individuals became apparent, for there was a small dinosaur on the ground. Its size wasn't due to it being one of the more diminutive in stature breeds of dinosaur, but more that it was an infant, and one of the carnivorous varieties also, looking very much, in fact, like a baby T-Rex. It seemed to have an inability to walk, so young in fact that it was rather resigned to crawling around on the ground, and flopping over onto its back occasionally, and kicking its back legs in frustration. Despite its size and the lack of threat it posed, as it was about the size of a cat, these two technology-armed individuals seemed very tentative with their approach. I assumed they were trying to capture it, but it seemed as though they wished to take endless scientific readings through their technology of the dinosaur, scanning it as they aimed their devices at it, etc. And maybe, after all these presumably necessary precautions, would they maybe then take possession of the baby T-Rex. At this moment also, I was joined by another, a young woman, as though she now had decided to accompany me, for I took it upon myself to approach the situation and scoop up the baby T-Rex, as the two scientific people were continuing with collecting data on it with their technologies. The moment I picked up the dino, the two individuals faded from the scene, but my new female companion remained. The T-Rex infant was relatively harmless, if you avoided its little jaws, which, yes, could still administer quite an eye-watering and respectable bite. A few moments later, a gigantic roar shook the scene we were in. The woman accompanying me spun me in the direction and source of the sound, and as she pointed, we could see another T-Rex type dinosaur approaching from the distance. This T-Rex, however, was monstrous in proportions. It looked somewhat rotund as well, as though it had a tendency to eat more than it required. A gigantic bloated T-Rex, but mobile enough, and far larger than a T-Rex would have been. This behemoth must have stood hundreds of feet high. As such, it reminded me a little of Godzilla. The woman beside me proclaimed how this baby T-Rex that I still held in my arms was its infant, and it had come to retrieve it, and should we not relinquish it, we would suffer extreme dinosaur teeth-related consequences. The scene rather switched and overlapped with several other scenes of random streets and places, as though all meshed together and interwoven. The only constant was us, the baby T-Rex I held, and the apparent parent T-Rex advancing swiftly upon us. There were crowds of people also, all associated with their respective overlapping scenes and places, going about their business, but seemingly oblivious of the enormous T-Rex that was stomping through the overall kaleidoscope of scenes, as though it could feature anywhere in creation, but remain unseen by those in the places it passed through. As we stood where we were, deciding our next course of action, the T-Rex within attacking range, there was a street of high-rise, skyscraping buildings that was a feature of one of the scenes that intermingled with all the others we were in, and we rather took refuge behind them. The enormous T-Rex would smash through one of the large buildings, so we ran along the street. The mighty T-Rex withdrew, but we could hear its progress as it stomped adjacent to the buildings that separated it from us, in the same direction as we ran. We paused as the line of buildings ended, anticipating what was to happen next, as the huge head of the T-Rex rounded the final building and glared at us, and had we ran beyond the protection of the final building, we would be exposed and rather caught in the open. All we had to do was relinquish the baby T-Rex, and we would be left alone, but I was adamant to keep it, and intended to make it to my house, which is usually representing the personal self recreated on the real side. But on this occasion it would serve as a sanctuary, and we would be beyond the ability of the T-Rex to reach. From a literal perspective, rather nonsensical, as the T-Rex had no difficulty with destroying skyscrapers, so it surely would have no problem blowing a small house down. But although this house represented my personal self, as is the usual representation, I had a kind of magical key that should I enter my house with it, we would be beyond the reach of the T-Rex. The experience would end there. Many times when we encounter huge monsters, we are dealing with the social consciousness, hence the size of such beasts, as an overall collective consciousness is very convoluted and compounded, and comprising of many idea agreements that are constantly added to, especially when a simulator is very old, as our one is, and such a consciousness monster would go unnoticed by the masses throughout all the various places and dimensions in creation they happen to be, as revealed here, with all the places in creation meshed together, with all the people featuring, but all oblivious of the monster in their midst. They, of course, don't recognize the conscious and mainly subconscious agreements that are destroying the world and deteriorating the simulator through cause and effect. So naturally, a monster representing the overall consciousness would move unseen throughout creation, except by those with the awareness to recognize and be conscious of how creation works, the cause and effect mechanics of it, and why the simulator is in demise. So the simulator implodes as a consequence of the continued agreements to constriction. The monster of overall consciousness gets ever larger and fatter toward this end, remaining generally unseen and unrecognized until the inevitable simulator conclusion. Then everything resets, and the simulator is recreated. All the unconscious individuals, still not having recognized the is, have body forms placed into the new simulator. As everything is starting over, the monster of collective consciousness would not be present, as it takes a time, or rather cause and effect agreements, to build up the monster again. But what happens is, despite these resets, the individuals tend to follow along similar decided lines as they did in previous simulators, when they assume eventually body forms where they have the ability to again personal self-decide. It's as though their overall inclinations and intents from the previous simulator still linger. The desire to be controllers, or the inclination to be passive, to have others decide for them and be controlled, broadly, categorically speaking. And so, could the little T-Rex baby represent then this overlap, this essence of intent that passes from those from the imploded simulator to those in the fresh one? And we might imagine then that although very small at this point, this T-Rex will grow according to the agreements that compound and build up the collective consciousness, and the simulator goes through its cycles of epochs again. And naturally, the gigantic monster of collective consciousness would be appropriately represented by a reptilian T-Rex, as all agreements throughout creation are to the control systems overwhelmingly that are agreements to reptilian restricting control ideas, which all lead to the Calorm God's door, the top reptilian, and a T-Rex is considered king of the dinosaurs. And as the Calorm also would be caught in the imploding simulator, and as he has been through many simulators, and always has a tendency of leaning toward his want to control, so it's conceivable that the Calorm begins anew in the restructured simulator, begins to build up his position again, becomes reptilian due to his poor life choices, and establishes himself once again, eventually, as king of the reptilians. So again, we see the little baby T-Rex as representing the potentiality of this consciousness of constriction due to agreement to reptilian control in subsequent recreated simulators, although in its infancy. But could it even be that this monstrous T-Rex in this experience represented actually the Calorm God himself, and not representing collective consciousness agreement to reptilian control? Very often, if someone takes the form of a child, it can represent their lack of awareness, as in being very young in their process of it. A child can represent the little personal self, and if our real side scene includes us also in an adult form with a little version of ourselves, we have then the real self and personal little self dynamic. But also a child form can represent the real awareness also, as children have that direct connection to the real awareness before they are absorbed and encased into their personal selves and the ideas they create and agree with through it. They may not recognize the is, but they stand in the reality of their real awareness while in creation, before being literalized and having their awareness encased in the illusions of the simulator. Can it be, then, that this woman and I were trying to engage being to being then with the real awareness of the Calorm that this infant T-Rex represented? Maybe the woman accompanying me was a real guide, and we were attempting to reason with the Calorm, to get agreement for him to perhaps operate from a more beneficial, making sense with life stance, but an engaging with him from a position beyond his created personal consciousness, that if successful might filter through to his personal self, just like how the real guides approach the real awareness of individuals on the real side. Then it must filter through to the personal self on the physical, which then has to decide and agree. When the guides give the opportunity of becoming more aware to people, etc., and perhaps the two scientists were attempting to engage the Calorm also by some technological means, through a literal creational interaction, so more from a personal self to personal self position, and as such this is unlikely to succeed, as the personal self of the Calorm is such that he is unlikely to relinquish his personal intent for control of creation. But possibly then, our engaging being to being on the real side, beyond the personal self simulations of creation, did draw the Calorm's attention. It did filter through to his personal self, and, as was then quite apparent, whatever we were attempting was rather met with resistance from his personal self, and certainly not agreement, as he came for us with murderous intentions. I'm unsure why my house would be a safe refuge. Maybe we had engaged being to being with the Calorm. Maybe we had then rather engaged him on a creational, simulated level, the results not as we had wished for, and now we were to reposition our focus back into the nowness of the isness of our real awareness, that we can supersede the creationally based cause-to-effect repercussions, an instant nullifying of creational consequences through a karma-free position that is the nowness of our real awareness and isness, as though we were shifting from creation to the reality of our real awareness by entering a house that represents my current personal self-consciousness, and where all causes to effects are created as I share what I do and operate through the personal self on the physical and creation, transitioning then to the nowness of my true being when whatever I was doing was completed, and regardless of success, I didn't remain in cause and effect creating mode any longer than was necessary to avoid the calorm effects, as it were. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "So you survived again, with the dinosaur after you, etc. It's like the influence. It doesn't matter. It's what's been created in creation that's agreed to, consciously and unconsciously. And a few people that are the scientists and the little baby dinosaur, in other words, they're playing with another idea that's not very good, because it's a little monster, and you come along and want to take it home, and this is okay, because you're confronting it all, but the big dinosaur wants his idea back, his kid. This is what we're doing. We're confronting, and we see what they're doing, and it's all about agreement. Who agrees? So there was the monster, and you ran and tried to hide behind buildings that the dinosaur wiped out. Well, those buildings are some of the ideas that we create, ideas that we think will protect us, but it's all about awareness. There's no hocus pocus. It's all about becoming more aware, and like the sun shining, as representing awareness, nothing can touch you. It's all about awareness, but in the meantime, we go through all of this. We see what's going on. We're trying to help people wake up. We're confronting the situation, and so we coddle these little ideas that the calorm God, the influence, and all his agents create. We confront these things because this is how it is in creation, and again, that's why there's only a few of us here, because most people want to hide in their created consciousness bubble and think they are okay with their ideas, etc. And they have the right to do that, but instead of that, you can have all life through your awareness, everything without restriction. So your experience is another adventure people can learn from.
Comments or questions for Kevin?
I had a question. for Kevin. Kevin, you said when you went into the personal self house, sort of, you know, getting away from this, that was the idea, from this social consciousness or the Callum himself. You said you had a what is it, a golden key or a special key to get into it that didn't allow him to interact with you on a cause to effect basis. Can you go over that again, please and thank you?
He was moving from the personal self of the real side, where if you step into the personal self, then you can then be, then you have all the effects to deal with of the personal self arena, because in order to be on the personal side in the simulation, you have to create something that then you can experience the effects of. And of course, when you're dealing with all these individuals, when you're engaging with them on the personal self arena in the simulation, you rather have to agree with the ideas that they or their situation represents, in which you can then feature in their effects. And also, as you step into your personal self, as you activate something of your personal self in order to be the effects of it, in order to be in the simulated personal side of the real side, you're also stepping into your personal self and its consciousness, and according to the agreements and the attachments that still remain with it, can also allow the potentiality for those agreements and attachments to be used as windows of attack opportunities for other individuals and characters to feature in your experience, and they can take advantage of these, etc. Because one of the main agreements that run through all the consciousness is, of course, agreements to the controllers, and that basically is an agreement which is tantamount to giving them permission to enter your experience at any time and then impose upon you in any way they wish. And so the idea then is that in order to, you're still operating in creation, but you can now be in, as you become more aware, you can effectively more and more remove yourself from this personal self arena, where you can be involved and embroiled in the effects. And then you can move yourself into the real awareness, true reality, which is the side from it, and then you become just the observer and the indifferent and objective view. And so in this real side experience that I shared, it was basically representing my transition from the personal self arena, in which I was engaging and agreeing with the ideas and therefore experiencing the effects of it, in which I could be attacked by the dinosaur, etc. And then as I stepped into my real awareness, so would I then be removing myself from these cause and effect situations. And so literally, as if you can let go of the entirety of that which you have just engaged with and agreed to and placed your attention with, which has you the effects of, then instantly the effects that you were experiencing can be nullified, and it's almost like you are moving into almost a different dimension, as it were, which effectively you are. You're moving from the personal self instantly into the real awareness, because the only way you can operate in the personal self of the simulation of creation is if you constantly are activating something, deciding on something, agreeing with something, basically playing with ideas in creation that are either yours or others, or you are emotionally reacting, which also is tantamount to creating effects then that you have to experience. And so it's rather, as you continue with your process on the real side and on the physical as well, in fact, but on the real side it's more apparent because of all the that which you can experience very, very quickly, as opposed to the physical, where it's a very drawn out cause and effect sequence, more so, that takes what we call time. But you become more adept at moving very quickly between your real awareness and your personal self in accordance to the situations that you're in and what you want to do in those experiences. I mean, for example, you might deliberately be wanting to engage with some sort of idea in the simulation in order that you can then have different experiences which stem off as a result of the effects, rather than just being indifferent and viewing it from your real awareness. Because otherwise it's just like watching a movie. If you engage with the movie, you can also then alter it accordingly and play a role in the effects of it. and the experience can roll out far differently than it may have otherwise have done, and therefore you get other viewpoints and comparisons for your recognition of the is. And so basically in this experience, I was moving from my personal self into my real awareness and making the transition in which I couldn't then suffer the effects of my attack, which I had brought upon myself by involving myself in a situation in which the dinosaur, whatever it may have represented, whatever view you like, whether it's the Calum or whatever creature or entity or the monster of social consciousness, can no longer affect me, because that such things, ideas, can only operate in the simulation. And so the house was more or less representing the almost like a crossover point in this experience. And the golden key would obviously, for me, the gold very much represents the isness of the true reality. So the gold key almost represents my entering through this entering almost like a transitional phase from my personal self to my real awareness, using the golden key to access it. But really the golden key was just a sort of it's it's just an additional feature of the experience to help represent that.
Yeah, and I see the controllers as being able to create consciousness for people to muddle through and become passive and dependent on them. And I see this in like something like politics, where they created this idea, this consciousness of politics, and then people assume that they're part of this, or they play a part in this thing called politics, and that they even created it, but they didn't. They just agreed to it. But the controllers created this thing called politics, created consciousness all around it, and then people assume that it's always been there. It's like, oh, this is the way it should be. It's been this way. We're part of this, but it's all a lie. It's all like fabricated. They had nothing to do with it except for their agreement that they bought into this thing called politics. Another one was history. I've mentioned this before about the Tartarians who lived supposedly, I don't know, but before 1820, there was a civilization that was like awesome. It had free energy and lived, they could go through portals. They were breatharians. We never hear about this. And who's alive really to deny or confirm history? 1820, you'd have to be a couple hundred years old here to confirm history. Yeah, sure, we have all these books and authorities telling us this is the way it happened, but do we really know that it really happened this way? All this stuff could be made up. Bury these old texts, and archaeologists find them and claim that these are from, thousands of years ago. History can be redone every generation, especially every 2 generations. They could wipe it clean and create a new history. And this is probably what's been done to confirm the controllers and what they have, their agenda. So another example of a consciousness that is agreed upon without really studying it, or, you study the history that's taught in schools and books, but really, is that the history? And this is just part of the programming that we have to deal with here in the consciousness. But see, it can be an adventure if you really don't agree to it. Dwayne says he doesn't agree to anything. So, I mean, don't agree to anything and come at it from that point. Don't be self-convinced about anything. Just deal with it as it comes and be now. Just be real with what's going on. And whatever you hear, whatever, you can agree to it or not. But if it helps you, if it references something that helps you to become more aware, then it's fine. But see, position yourself in a way that you can, your life is more of an adventure rather than just agreeing to stuff that you think has been created for you by others and for your benefit, which it really hasn't here. Nothing here really makes sense. It just appears to make sense. But with the new presentation and what the real guides are providing, I mean, it really does point you to something real, and it does make sense.
That's why they control the news.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's obvious.
That's why they control the books. They control everything. That's why it makes it so difficult to get the truth out there.
Yeah, it's really not about truth either. It's just what is. So even truth has been created. That's idea about something's true and something's not. Very interesting the way they set it up and the way they cleverly manipulated our attention, way what we focus on and what we assume. Even our assumptions are being manipulated. You know what we assume.
Well, we pay them.
We pay them.
We pay them through our taxes. All this is controlled through the governments.
Some of us pay them.
Controlled by the big boys. You control the governments, you control the news. You can't. It's so difficult to get the truth out there.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We all face this.
So how are you going to get the money to do this?
Well, it's not even about the money. It's there's other things going on too. That's just one of the projects, the bonds and the money, the funding. But it really entails a lot more than that. And that's what, you know, the thing is, to bring it into the physical, all these things that have already been established on the real side, bring them into the physical, whether it's through money or through other means.
Look how easy it was to destroy Ikankar.
Destroy it?
Yeah, they destroyed it.
Oh, I see what you mean by the takeover.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is part of how things progress. They're created, they endure, and then they're destroyed. You know,
Yeah.
So
we were warned about it too.
Yeah.
Paul wrote in his books. He said this is going to happen.
And when Dwayne leaves, if he does,
this early though.
Pardon?
I said it wasn't supposed to happen this early. He predicted something like a couple of 100 years that the rod of power would be lost. And obviously that happened before then.
I never got that impression. My impression was it would happen right away.
Well, that's what I'm saying is what was in the books. Paul had originally written that within 200 years, Ekankar would lose the rod of power. But it also said in the original books that the rod of power is only supposed to be held for 20 years by each successive master. They're not supposed to really go too much beyond that, maybe 1 or 2 years. But do you remember that, Val, from the original books?
I remember something like that, yeah. But again, these are just, it's whatever, you know, it's not the Bible. It's just something he said for people to take in and use. And like everything he said, basically, nothing really referred to the is, hardly, barely anything. So he was just a step in terms of what's going on now. He's a stepping stone. Anything he said, don't take it. It was literal, basically. Everything he said, it was literal. And it's pointing to what, you know, the stepping stone to what Dwayne's presenting now. It's just a stepping stone. And hardly any of it was other than anything literal. The God planes, all the chariot, all this stuff was literal, basically. It sounded good, and it was more so than anything else that had been created before, but it's still literal, you know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was just curious if you had remembered reading that in the book.
Yeah.
Well, that's
but
important.
He made a lot of predictions that didn't come true, so it's just part of it. People have free will.
Well, if you're talking about the Ekvidya, you know, it's basically the future has to be formed. I mean, there are. He was looking at one future, one potential future. And so it's very hard to make predictions. Short-term predictions would be a lot easier than the long-term. Mm-hmm. Long-term, he was wrong a lot. but that's because he was looking at one particular future. So things have changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah.
And we're creating it now. So
yes, exactly. Tim, did you get anything from the reading? Kevin's experience you would like to share?
Yeah, I was thinking the simulator, that it doesn't really matter in a simulator if you crash and burn, you don't get hurt. In this passing dream stuff of experiences while we're in that, whatever you want to call it, dream state that isn't the real awareness. So, and this stuff about the all is, going through this game or whatever you want to call it of breaking itself into pieces or playing the hide and seek with itself, a passing dream. It just is amazing that the life is the way it is in this physical realm on this speck of dirt that's called the human farming prison planet. This isn't going to change. Nobody's going to make it any better on this speck of dirt. It's just a prison planet. So we get our experiences to become more aware, to find out how we can earn our way into these real universes where we don't have to be in the prison planet unless we come here to help others become more aware of something. There's a whole lot going on that doesn't seem like any of it really matters in a simulator. It's just experiences. It's just like having this physical body that's a bunch of whatever you want to call it, vibration, energy, frequencies, or what. It only lasts so long, and so does the simulator. So it's all the process we're going through. I guess everything's needed. That or we wouldn't even have to be in the simulator. We would have just stayed the all is as it is.
And just like a flight simulator with a jet airplane, you're in the simulator in order to practice becoming, when you become in the real situation, flying the plane. So we're in the simulator practicing or preparing as Dwayne calls it, to be in the greater view, or to the real, basically the real view. So this is like preparation for us. So take advantage of it. We should take advantage of it so we can, when we do pass through, we're not burdened with a lot of attachments or stress as we pass through the simulator into something other than this. Most people pass into another form of simulator, but we have a potential here to pass into or be or recognize the real universes, which is beyond the simulator. And again, just like passing through one of those, just a doorway or portal or something, just leave everything behind. Be prepared for leaving everything behind, because it's worthless in a way, except for the experiences that you learn to help you wake up and to recognize this reality. So be prepared to leave it behind and move into another position.
Drag stuff along.
It is a simulator. Yes, it's a simulator. But you can play with it. You can, that's the cool thing. You can utilize it. It's not like denying it exists. We can still utilize it. That's the cool thing. And to assist others. We're using the simulator to help others too, through what we're doing.
I think service is part of what gets you out.
Yeah, whatever way or form.
I was thinking about your friend that died yesterday, and the real guide's seen that, and that sounds like Dwayne wrote about his, whatever you want to call it, wife or companion or other part, sacrificing herself so that they wouldn't religiously kill in the physical their daughter. So maybe he already earned his way right then and there into the real universes. Because that sounds like that's the way she got into the real universes. Was by sacrificing her life, giving it up for to save their daughter.
Possibly. I mean, that's, you know, any act of love basically is something that I know. It's the last time I actually saw any of the real guides. Basically, it was Shams Tabriz just kind of walked in on me, and his only message was, "We admire what you're doing," because I've been kind of beaten up pretty badly a couple of times, and so that was it. And then I thought he was going to tell me to stop what I was doing, you know, because I basically get into a lot of trouble just by being you know, notorious online. But under the circumstances, no, there was no other message. That was it. And so I kept up for a while, and I'm trying to slow down and pull out of the whole thing now and see if I can concentrate more on getting to the all is. And but that means letting go. You know, you have to be able to let go of the whole prior life. And so, you know, that's why I watch you guys. You know, that's what I'm looking to you to, you know, just to see how to do it. But little by little, I hope to get there.
Yeah, just be willing to see more. Just that. Be sincerely willing, you know. Allow it to come in, allow it to show itself. Hide and go seek. Well, thank you again, Kevin, for having the courage to do this and to bring it all back for us. You're going through it. Okay, so yeah, thanks everybody else for being here too. We usually sing the NUUU, which is our connection to this reality that just is. And it goes like this. NUUU. Jeremy?
NUUU.
Charles?
NUUU.
Ronald?
NUUU.
Tim?
NUUU.
And then Kevin. See everybody next time. Next time Kevin's on is Sunday at 11. We'll see you then.